Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me at the Nasdaq market site in Times Square, New York City, we have Andrew Beagley, Chief Risk and Compliance Officer at RiskOpsAI. We also have Roshan, Shetty, Head of BFSI and Public Sector at Mahindra Americas, and Graham McMillan, Chief Technology Officer at Redgate. We're here to discuss building effective cybersecurity and database risk management and continuous compliance. It is great to have all of you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. And Andrew, give us a brief refresher. Remind us where RiskOpsAI sits within the cyber ecosystem.
Right. So thank you, Jill. It's great to be here. So where we're helping organizations is taking whatever cyber risk management that they have in place today, using an AI native approach to get them onto the front foot with continuous risk assessments, bringing together multiple different data sources, quantifying risk in a more meaningful way, and holistically creating a single source of truth so that the organization as a whole can see the impact of cyber risk on its goals and objectives.
Yeah, and this is what we've spoken about a number of times in the past, not being so siloed when you're trying to assess your risk and vulnerabilities. Roshan, tell us more about Mahindra.
So Mahindra is a tech services actually company. It works across different kind of industries. I belong to the BFSI industry vertical, which is a regulated kind of an industry, and the risk and compliance actually and cybersecurity is front and center of actually the BFSI industry. So happy to be out here, and thanks for having me out here,
Okay.
Jill.
You got it. And Graham, Redgate, all the way from Cambridge.
Thanks, Jill. Yes, Redgate Software, we make tools that help customers look after relational databases, all the big four, but we're helping them monitor, understand who's accessing those databases, performance, increasingly important as auditors want to know how the databases are performing and that they're all being kept secure.
Right, and Graham, that is one of the challenges where you're trying to align today's risk with business goals and strategies. It's a fine balance to achieve.
It is, but these things have been around for a long time, and we're finding that our customers, and we've been working with our customers for a long time and helping them do that. So as new regulations come in, we help them assess those, we help them map their environments, and really focusing on the database. The database is key. 75% of our data continues to be in relational databases. So if you can keep that secure, block and tackle the databases, make sure that they're being patched, they're being backed up, you know who's accessing it, then that will give you confidence and give the boardroom confidence that you're meeting your requirements regardless of the standards or the legislation. Once you've got your databases nailed, you can be confident.
And we're going to come back to that in just a moment here, but Roshan, when you're thinking about this data dilemma and building trust across the organization as it relates to data, how are organizations looking for more intelligent ways to consolidate?
So I think, Jill, first, the organizations are looking at what is the digital asset exposures that they have. So having a very strong inventory of what are the digital assets that you have within the organization is first fundamental. The second is actually, do you have a common kind of a nomenclature, framework in place to kind of leverage the information that is there across these systems? And then you come to the data which is actually residing in these systems. And you need to kind of get all the data together to make meaningful kind of sense. And you have different personas within organizations which have different kind of responsibilities. So the data sets need to actually kind of make relevance to each of the functions, thereby actually kind of bringing the risk and compliance part into the picture. So data forms actually the backbone, but the system information and the frameworks are important.
Right, they certainly are. And Andrew, Roshan had mentioned understanding the different nomenclature. So when you think about all the stakeholders across the organization, who does that entail? Why is there a need for transparency? I think, especially with larger corporations operating in silos, it's hard to get out of your own way sometimes with that.
Absolutely, Jill. So if you think of there's any number of key stakeholders, whether you're on the board, whether you're the chief investment officer, the CISO, the chief risk officer, and so on, everybody has an interest in making sure that there's a centralized view of risk and a common understanding of risk. So it's important to, just picking up what you said there, Roshan, to be able to bring together disparate data sources from different parts of the organization, make sense of those into one place, create this single source of truth, but importantly, make sure that you're able to generate analytics that meet the needs of those individual stakeholders at any point in time and as close to real time as possible.
Yeah, I mean, you could even make the argument that other functions such as revenue, product, sales, mark columns, they have a stake in it as well. Should there be an incident and they need to be able to respond to customers and ensure that we are mitigating the right way and we're also responding in a proactive way.
Absolutely. So it's about risk management, but it's also about efficiency as well. I mean, there's so many different silos, so many different potential sets of books and records in an organization that just creates inefficiency and inhibits a company from having a true, transparent, single view of what's going on in terms of its risk profile. And you're right, Jill. I mean, everybody in the organization has a role to play, has a vested interest in making sure that those records are centralized, and using automation, using AI to normalize those data sources to consolidate in an effective way stands an organization in good stead for any number of reasons.
Right. And so, Graham, it comes down to robust database management processes, almost thinking like an engineer, processes and constant preparation, and being proactive. It's too late once you're at the response phase if you haven't prepared yourself for these scenarios.
Yeah, and Regulate's been working for 25 years with customers, and we continue to hear from them and say, actually, these things are the basics, and what the legislation is doing, what the standards are doing, are helping you do the right thing. We want to make it simple to do the right thing. So patch, keep things secure, understand who's joining, moving, leaving your organization. Are they still got access to those data sets, to systems they shouldn't have? And then feed that into an overall system, like Andrew was saying, that can provide those insights. Because we find, and companies tell us, that it's really hard to hire people to look after your systems, to do database administration. So the tools that you're using need to help those people spend time on supplying information to auditors into systems that will help provide that answer, rather than spending 50% of their time just running around satisfying compliance. And so how are you going to satisfy the regulator, the auditor, is key to addressing these risks.
Yeah, and Roshan, when we think about it with financial institutions, one of the most heavily regulated industries, you have to display effective compliance and governance, especially with DORA, D-O-R-A, that's newer on the compliance map. Tell us more about that and what the specific challenges that financial institutions could potentially face.
So I think there are many elements that you touched upon. So I think the first aspect is, in financial institutions, you need to have a kind of a single rule book which tells you about different kind of compliances that you need to kind of adhere to. So DORA actually kind of helps you to do that in the European context, and there's a parallel of that in the US context also, where you have regulatory bodies that actually kind of define these regulations. Now, it's important to actually kind of have a mechanism wherein you're able to kind of have the first line of defense and the second line of defense. The first line of defense typically should be a next generation kind of a SIM or a SOX kind of a model that kind of detects things that can actually go wrong based on actually different kind of actors, behavioral patterns and all that stuff. And then you need to actually have a second line of defense, which is more going back to Andrew's point about having AI-based actually machine learning capabilities to look at the data and to kind of feed into the first line of defense in terms of how do you kind of defend and make that actually kind of compliance more of a continuous kind of a compliance kind of an exercise, And that's very important in financial institutions. Otherwise, you'll actually have a lot of actually external kind of factors impacting your business,
Yeah. Is DORA an extension of GDPR in a way, Andrew? How is it different?
So DORA really goes to the heart of the financial institutions' operations and systems and controls. So it's broader than kind of data privacy and GDPR. But what DORA is mostly concerned about is really, where does an organization sit today in terms of its systems and controls, its books and records, its oversight of third-party vendors, for example. So every organization in some way, shape or form that's covered by DORA is somewhat DORA compliant. The challenge that companies are facing right now, as they're hopefully finalizing the implementation, is exactly how prepared are we for DORA? Are we 60% prepared? Are we 95% prepared? So a compliance program that takes into account maturity modeling, for example, so you can say at a point in time of the 5 DORA pillars, where do we sit today? That's what organizations are really grappling with. And then if you can do that, you're able to then to prioritize where you need to spend your time and effort to get fully prepared for when the regulators actually come in, as they're doing now, to assess your readiness for DORA.
Well, Graham, let's talk about that some more from the legislative and regulatory perspective. If that framework isn't necessarily in place or implemented yet, how should companies be thinking about this?
Well, I've been talking to our US customers this week, and they have been preparing for 5 years. I mean, it was first mooted in 2020, so they've had a long time to prepare. And like I was saying earlier, this is about making it simple to do the right things well. It's understanding the full gamut of the risks and being able to have tools that can guide you and see some of that signal from the noise, which is where AI can start to really help, because AI, as we've discussed in the past, can be quite a challenge to be consistent and predictable. So what we're providing our customers with is tools to say, don't look over there, look here, and focus in on these things. These are the important things that you need to address today. And any US customer with a US organization in financial services with a subsidiary in the EU is going to be affected by this. And fines can be up to $1 million for individuals, which is, again, a stepping up into those pieces of sort of the stick to implement this. So the people I'm talking to, my customers, are saying, actually, we'll use this as a standard that we have to apply. And that we won't be different in the EU or the US or Asia Pac. We'll implement it globally, and we think that will stand us in really good stead to address the risks, the cyber risks, those other things.
Well, I mean, Andrew, that kind of sounds like the pathway that was taken for GDPR. I mean, for asset managers, if you want to, operate and have clients in the EU, you had to adhere to it.
Absolutely. So I think there are parallels in terms of kind of the planning, preparations, and the implementation. GDPR, and DORA alongside one another. There's definite similarities there. I think where AI plays an important role today, which perhaps AI wasn't as developed when GDPR was coming in, is AI gives you the opportunity to get onto the front foot with more of a continuous approach to compliance and risk assessments, to understanding control effectiveness, to create maturity modeling, and then to get into some form of risk prioritization. These are all techniques using an AI native approach for DORA preparations that weren't necessarily around for GDPR. Right. So that's an interesting distinction in the years that have gone by.
In fact, Jill, just to build on top of that, see, the DORA is actually is impacting almost about 22,000 kind of institutions. And if I look at actually what the Dutch regulators have done, the AFM, they have actually kind of asked all these firms to kind of give a register of the assets that they have and the ICT contracts that they have, so that they can actually kind of look at that and give some suggestions to the firms in terms of what needs to be done. The second thing that they have actually done is they have done a kind of a thematic audit, trying to kind of look at certain parameters which are there in the DORA compliance and seeing how the financial institutions are performing based on that. And then there is actually an institutional audit that they are doing, which is a very deep kind of an audit in terms of looking at various aspects of this institution as to how they are actually kind of responding to the guidelines. But more importantly, they have created actually a website where firms can go and register the kind of risks that they are actually seeing. So that's a way of actually sharing information across to everyone and trying to make sure that the environment actually and the ecosystem becomes much more aware of things that are happening and what is actually the actions that they are taking in order to address it. So that's a very good example of a forward-looking actually regulatory behavior.
I believe they also did something similar for the DSA, the Digital Services Act, with getting that type of feedback from the multiple stakeholders. Graham, is it challenging when you're building an integrated program and not necessarily understanding your role or feeling stuck in the middle, or being able to effectively communicate? I mean, we were talking about this off camera, but you're seeing more cyber professionals on the boards right now to be able to communicate the cyber needs and risk mitigation efforts. Do you feel like you're in a silo yourself with this sometimes?
I think you can feel somewhat overwhelmed by this, but I think you take a step back. There are tools and frameworks like NIS2 in Europe or NIST in North America, which can help plot a path through this. And if you've got tools that help map out the frameworks that Roshan was talking about, the common service data model can help you articulate where to start looking. And I would say, again, go back to the database. We haven't tested any of this legislation in the courts yet, but if you've got your data safely behind secure firewalls and networks, then I think that will be the foundation that will put you in good stead. We haven't tested in the courts, but if you breach, if you have corruption in data or data is lost, I think the regulator will come down much harder on that than if the website's down.
Yeah, because the framework already exists for that for all intents and purposes. So let's think about this in the last 5 minutes here, Andrew. Going forward, the technology and all the stakeholders, good and bad, it's evolving more, way faster than legislation and regulations can keep up. What does this look like? And maybe the conversation's different in a year to 3 years from now.
So absolutely, Jill. I'm sure in 3 years' time, we're going to be having a totally different conversation again. But they will be building on the principles that we're working on today about having the ability to using AI and using an AI native approach to help organizations take their more traditional compliance and risk programs and get them onto the front foot. And by that we mean the ability to perform continuous risk assessments, and that's just going to get better and better and more efficient as time goes by. Then to be able to quantify risk in a meaningful way in terms of dollars and cents rather than red, amber, green, or high, medium, and low, to measure control effectiveness. These are all technology-related techniques that today are helping companies improve their risk and compliance programs, whether it's financial services or any other industry for that matter. But we're going to continue to see that evolve, and it's the organizations that are at the cutting edge of this that are really playing a significant role in guiding organizations, explaining what can be done today, building confidence in this new approach that's really going to kind of set the agenda for what we all understand by risk and compliance going forward.
Yeah, and Roshan, this is something that we were discussing as well, but there seems to be, in a very competitive landscape, this rush to go to market, whether it's internal or external facing products, and we're seeing the pendulum kind of swing back to the middle, with some of them, cloud being an example. I wonder if there will be some lessons learned from this last cycle of cloud migration, if you will.
Absolutely. I love the way that you actually kind of give an analogy of cloud. So when cloud came in, everyone wanted to kind of just go and explore the cloud and took all their systems and actually kind of data onto cloud without realizing whether there will be a business agility angle to it and will they get a benefit out of it. The same is happening in some shape and form in terms of AI, because AI is being actually used on the fringes right now, more in terms of efficiency play, either in actually the development of software or in terms of actually infrastructure management services or in terms of actually keeping the lights on BAU support of actually systems. I genuinely feel that in order to kind of get the ROI for use cases related to AI, and also actually building on what Andrew said in terms of getting the benefits in terms of risk and compliance, you need to actually have the AI use cases impacting the core businesses. Right. If you actually kind of do that, then you will actually get outputs out which will be much more beneficial. And yes, the industry is going to evolve. 3 years down the line, we are going to actually have maybe another interesting conversation in terms of how the evolution has happened, but that's actually what technology has been all throughout over the years. But it's important that how do you kind of define the roadmap and you actually kind of see that it is beneficial for your business, it's beneficial for the risk and compliance aspects, and it's actually beneficial for the consumers. That's the aspect that you need to keep in mind.
And Graham, to wrap up here, you don't necessarily want to create solutions for problems that don't exist.
That's right.
You want to think about it from an efficiency perspective of your core strategy, not just satisfying a percent of a percent.
That's right. And I think with the regulations, they are very prescriptive, but they're asking you to do things we've been doing forever. Don't test in production. Back up your services. Are those backups going to work? Retest those backups. Those are the things that we've been doing for a long time. So I wouldn't be panicked by this legislation. Our customers are saying, can you help us? Can you bring your tools to help us and navigate this thing? But we will continue to store data in relational databases, and we need to think about those basics and then feed those data in the tools that Andrew's talked about and the services that Roshan's also mentioned.
All right, appreciate everyone's insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at NASDAQ.